What's going on, guys? QLZ here, and I'm going to be doing something a little different today with Photoshop tutorial. In my tutorial, I will cover some basic and advanced Photoshop techniques that I use to make this space scene, and hopefully you'll be able to replicate it. So let's get right into it. First off, we're going to start by making a new scene, and I'm going to be setting mine to 1920 by 1080 in the pixels. I'm doing this so that I can use it as a desktop background. If you know what size you want to make it, you can change yours to fit that. So we're just going to start off. So go ahead and start off by making a new layer. We're going to paint in this layer so that it's completely black using the paint tool. So secondly, I don't have a Wacom tablet and I'm going to be using a mouse and keyboard to do this. So I don't want to hand paint stars in myself as that's extremely tedious and Photoshop does a lot of those things for you. So we're going to go up to the filter menu in the top and we're going to add noise under the noise category. It starts off looking like an old TV with a lot of static. Make sure you have monochromatic turned on and set the amount so that it's just a little bit darker. If you go too high, you'll notice that the whole picture starts to turn white, which you don't want. So this is obviously way too many stars. So what we're going to want to do is go to the image, adjustments, and the level settings, or Control L. And we're going to mess with these until we find something that fits. You'll find that lowering the levels decreases the amount of stars that you can see within the pattern. That's probably bright enough for that, but there are still too many stars in this, and it's too dense. Using the marquee selection tool, I'm going to highlight a section of the stars that I find fitting to cover the entire area. Once you have that selection, go ahead and press Ctrl T, which brings up the free transform tool, lets you modify the area that you have selected. Using the Alt key, you can triangulate that from the middle of the screen, or the Shift key, you can triangulate it from the corner, so that you lose no scale in the image. I'm going to be using the Alt key so that I can fill up the whole space that I have. So now that I have an acceptable amount of stars, I'm going to start adding planets in. So under a new layer, we're going to start our first planet. Switching the marquee selection tool into the ellipse selection tool lets us make a circle rather than a square. I'm going to be using this to make most of the planets in the scene. Holding down the Alt key gives me a nice planet form, which is exactly what I need for this. Once I have an acceptable size, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my paint tool and find a nice color under this. For this big planet, I'm going to be using a nice dark green and a blue tinge. After I color in the whole marquee, we can move on to make it look more like a planet rather than a big green blob in the middle of the screen. Perfect. Using the Move tool, we can move the planet around freely in the scene, as I don't want it taking up too much real estate within the actual scene. So now we're going to start adding image effects, which turns this green blob into an actual planet. The way to get to the image effects is at this FX key down at the bottom of the Layers tool. Make sure you have the layer you want to affect selected, and then go into that. The first one we're going to add is Bevel and Emboss. We do this so that the planet pops out of the screen more instead of sitting off in the background. Feel free to mess around with these values until you come up with a value that you find fits it. I recommend turning down the opacity so it seems less harsh. The next layer effect that I want to add is an inner shadow. This makes the planet feel like it has a nice round bottom to it. Once again, feel free to mess with the values to find exactly the way you want to do it. I'm going to turn off the Use Global Light tool so that I can adjust exactly which way my planet sits. A nice helpful tip is that the size key at the bottom adjusts how blurry it is, and you don't want it to be too sharp unless that's the art style you're going for. I'm going to go with something nice and blurry. The next thing I'm going to add is an outer glow to the planet. A lot of planets have a nice rim of blue light or white light coming off of them, and that's something I want to emulate with this planet. I'm going to find a nice light blue, and I'm going to increase the spread and the size so that I get a nice little rim around the planet. So the last thing I need to add is some roughness to the planet, as no planet is this smooth. So go ahead and turn on the pattern overlay, and we're going to set it to overlay. If it doesn't come out exactly how you like, feel free to switch the scale and the opacity so it gives you a nice planet feel. You don't want to go with something too obvious as it clearly shows up as a pattern. So feel free to switch through the Photoshop preset patterns to find out which one you like. I'm going to go with this one. Has a nice feel to it. Just a bit more work with the shadow, and I'm okay with this planet for now. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a second planet. You can either do this by making a new marquee tool and adding in a planet, or simply dragging the layer into the new layer function, which gives you a second version of the same layer. The only thing about that is the planet's too large and it's the exact same color and pattern. So this means I'll need to make it smaller and add a different color to it. I can use this by either painting over the layer or by doing a color overlay, which is another image effect. I'm going to start off by putting the planet where I want, making it a bit smaller using the shift key to make sure that the transform is uniform. That seems like a good size. I'm just going to move the planet up to a position that I find fits better. That's a good position. So the first things I'm going to do is try and make this planet look differentiated from the other one. I'm going to start off by getting rid of the outer glow and changing the pattern overlay on the planet. I could do this by simply choosing a different overlay and making sure that it fits good. That looks nice. So another thing I do is change the angle that I set the inner shadow at. Make sure that you don't have the global light on, because then it'll change it for everything in your scene. Okay. And another thing is I'm going to change this because I'm going to be changing the color of the planet and the blue will stick out. I'm going to be using an orange. So again, as I said, you can either color over the planet or use the color overlay, which I'll be using. So that's a nice orange. Now I'm going to flip through and try and find one that fits this planet the best. So I think Hardlight is the one I'm going to use today. So now I'm going to make a moon for this planet, as it seems quite barren off to the side by itself. So now I'm going to make a new layer for the moon. The moon is going to be significantly smaller than the other two planets. And I'm going to use the ellipse tool again and holding the Alt key to make sure that I get a nice uniform scale. So I'm going to choose a color that fits the moon the best. Something like a nice beige. And color in the planet again. Once again, the planet looks out of place. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take the image effects that are on the second planet, and I'm going to overlay that onto the third planet. The way to do that is by right-clicking the layer that has the layer style, copying that layer style, clicking on the new layer, and pasting it onto that. It'll immediately adapt all of those changes. The only thing I need to do is take off the color overlay by switching the eye off, and by setting the inner shadow to something darker so that it seems more like a moon. I'm also going to pick a new pattern and increase the opacity so that it has a nice rough moon texture to it. Perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some nebula lights so that the scene isn't just planets. So I'm going to make a new layer. So for this new layer, I'm going to set the color to black, and I'm going to go into the filter again. And this time, instead of noise, I'm going to render out clouds. Clouds gives you a nice rough random texture. By setting it to screen and decreasing the opacity to about 10, it gives it a nice shadowy kind of figure to it. Make sure you put the cloud layer beneath the planets so that they stick out more in the scene. I'm also going to add outer glow to the planet so that it fits in better. And I'm going to turn down the opacity so it's not so drastic. I'm going to do the same for the moon as well. Perfect. Now I'm going to add a bit of nebula color to it. I'm going to do that on a layer above the cloud layer, but still beneath the rest of the planets. By switching the paint bucket tool into the gradient tool by holding down and selecting a gradient that I find fits a nebula the best, I'm going to go with this Photoshop standard one. If you like, you can set the colors of your gradients by hand, but for me, I'm just going to use this one for now. By clicking and dragging across the scene, the gradient is applied in the direction that you drag your mouse. I'm also going to set this one to screen as well and lower the opacity. So as it seems like there's too much light in the scene, I'm actually going to erase some of the nebula color. I'm going to turn down the opacity of my eraser, and I'm going to reduce the hardness so that you don't actually see the circle that I'm erasing using. Perfect. I might lower the opacity just a bit, as it seems just a bit too much color. So that's all I'm doing for this scene. If you'd like to increase it more, add more planets, anything like that to make it fit your needs, feel free to. I'll show you one last tip for duplicating planets just in case you feel you don't have enough and you want to increase the amount by a lot. By holding the control key with the move tool selected, you can move around the exact layer that you actually click on. Also, if you hold the Alt key and click on that layer, it will duplicate the layer that you clicked on, and you'll be able to move that around the scene. So now I have 2 of these planets. I'm not going to save that, but just in case you need that in your scene, you can use this tool. Thank you for watching my tutorial, and if you feel that you need other help, feel free to ask me in the comment section below, and give me a like if this tutorial helped you.